The house still smelled like smoke, even after a year. Even after new paint, new furniture, and 100 open windows. Eliot sat on the porch steps, chin resting on his knees, watching the sunset bleed into the trees. In his lap an old, melted keychain, the only thing he'd grabbed the night the fire took everything. Behind him, the house creaked, soft, tired, like a heart that didn't quite know how to beat right anymore. His grandmother called out, "Dinner, sweetheart." He didn't move, didn't answer. He didn't hate her, didn't hate the house. But every corner felt like an echo, every door, a reminder of ones that would never open again. That's when the van pulled into the driveway. A battered white shelter van, paint peeling from the sides. The door slid open, and a woman in a bright jacket hopped out. In the back, tethered but alert, sat a dog. Big, golden and black, one ear flopped down at a crooked angle. The dog didn't bark, didn't lunge, just stared at Eliot with eyes so fierce and so broken it made him forget how to breathe. The woman smiled awkwardly. "This is Nova. She's retired. Thought maybe you could meet." Eliot didn't speak, didn't nod, but he stood up. The keychain clenched tight in his fist and took a step toward the dog. Nova stood too, not eager, not scared. Just steady, like someone who understood that sometimes the world ended quietly. And when it did, the only thing left to do was to walk through the ashes, together. Before the fire, Eliot had a life full of noise. Laughter spilling down the hallways, piano music on Sunday mornings. His mother humming while she packed his school lunches. It wasn't perfect. There were arguments over bedtime, broccoli, and too many video games, but it was alive. All it took was one spark, one overloaded socket, one moment when no one was looking. And everything he knew turned into smoke. He remembered the heat first, then the way his father's arms wrapped around him, carrying him out the front door. The last thing he saw before the roof collapsed was his mother's hand pushing him forward, pushing him away, saving him, at the cost of herself. He didn't remember much after that, just the hospital. The heavy smell of burned plastic, the bandages on his arms. The way his voice didn't come back, no matter how much the doctors tried. He could speak if he wanted. Physically, there was nothing wrong. But words felt like betrayals now. Every "I'm fine" would be a lie. So he stayed silent, moved in with his grandmother. A kind woman with kind eyes and a kitchen full of empty chairs. She didn't push him, didn't scold him, she just let him be. At school, Eliot drifted through the days. Teachers marked him present, classmates avoided his shadow. And Eliot learned to live like smoke, invisible, untouchable. Gone before anyone noticed, until Nova. One look into her battered eyes, and he felt something stir deep in his chest. Something that whispered, "Maybe you're not as alone as you think." Nova didn't push. She didn't jump or bark or demand. She simply sat. At the edge of Eliot's space, waiting. The first few days, they circled each other like ghosts. Eliot would sit on the porch, knees pulled tight to his chest, staring into the trees. Nova would lie nearby, chin resting on her paws, her ears swiveling at every sound but never moving closer. One afternoon, it rained. Not a storm, just a slow, steady drizzle that soaked the ground and dripped from the gutters. Eliot stayed outside anyway, so did Nova. She didn't flinch at the wet, didn't seek shelter. She simply sat, her golden coat darkened with rain, her steady gaze never leaving Eliot's silhouette. That night, when Eliot finally stood and turned toward the house, Nova followed. Just a step behind, silent, steady. In the kitchen, his grandmother smiled and set down two bowls, one for Eliot, one for Nova. Eliot hesitated, then knelt to place Nova's bowl closer. A simple gesture, but in a house filled with absence, it was the first true connection he had made in months. Each day after that, the space between them shrank. First, a few steps closer during their walks. Then, Nova brushing her side lightly against his knee. Then, Eliot reaching out tentative, trembling to scratch behind her ear. Nova leaned into his hand, eyes closing briefly, like someone remembering how to trust. Neither spoke, neither needed to. Because sometimes, words are too small for the things that hurt most. And sometimes, the only language strong enough to heal a broken soul is presence. The letter came on a Thursday, folded neatly, tucked into a plain white envelope with no return address. Eliot's grandmother read it aloud at the kitchen table while Eliot pushed peas around his plate. Attention! Previous service dogs in private homes must undergo reassessment to determine fitness for continued placement. Nova is scheduled for evaluation next week. Eliot's fork clattered onto the table. Nova, curled up by the door, lifted her head at the noise. The grandmother's hands trembled slightly as she set the letter down. It's just a checkup, sweetheart. A formality, but Eliot knew better. He had heard whispers at the shelter when they first picked Nova up. Hard to place, might not pass reassessment. Too much trauma. He looked at Nova at the way one ear never stood quite straight, the faint scars hidden under her thick fur. Nova wasn't a problem, she was proof of survival. And now strangers, people who had never sat through the rain with her, never walked beside her silence, would decide if she was worthy to stay. Eliot's chest tightened. Memories of clipboards, signatures, decisions made by people who didn't know him, didn't care about him, flashed through his mind. He couldn't lose Nova, not now, not when they had only just found each other. He stood from the table, the chair scraping sharply against the floor, and crossed the kitchen to Nova. He knelt, buried his fingers deep in her thick fur. "You're not going anywhere," he whispered. Nova nudged his hand gently with her nose. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the promise. And for Eliot, that was enough. It had to be. Eliot didn't wait. That night, after his grandmother had gone to bed, he sat at the kitchen table with a stack of scrap paper and a stubby pencil. He didn't know the right words, didn't know the right people, but he knew how to try. He wrote letters. "Nova is my dog. She is brave. She stayed with me when no one else did." He taped a photo of Nova, one he had taken with an old Polaroid. To each letter, he folded them carefully, carried them to school the next day. At recess, while other kids played tag and soccer, Eliot walked from teacher to teacher, classmate to classmate, quietly handing out his letters. Some read them immediately, some tucked them into pockets. Most just looked confused. Eliot didn't mind. He had learned long ago, hope doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a paper letter clutched in a trembling hand. By the end of the week, people started noticing. A neighbor dropped off a bag of dog treats with a note, "For Nova, keep fighting." The librarian slipped him a flyer for a local fundraiser. "We can help cover reassessment costs if needed." Mr. Jensen, the school janitor, who rarely spoke more than a grunt, gave Eliot a quiet nod and said, "That dog's a keeper, kid." Each small kindness lit a match in the dark corners of Eliot's chest. Each act whispered, "You're not fighting alone." At home, he built a small obstacle course in the backyard. Nothing fancy, just broomsticks balanced on buckets, tunnels made of old blankets. Every evening, he trained with Nova, teaching her to jump, to follow hand signals, to stay calm under loud noises. Nova wasn't perfect. She still flinched sometimes, still froze when sirens echoed from town, but she always came back, always tried, just like Eliot. They weren't training to impress anyone, they were training to stay together. And in every leap, every shaky triumph, they stitched something invisible and indestructible between them: belief. The week before Nova's assessment, Eliot sat on the swings behind the school, the letter about the evaluation crumpled in his pocket. The world felt too big again, too loud, too fast. Maybe no matter how hard he tried, it wouldn't be enough. Maybe Nova would still be taken away. Maybe fighting didn't always matter. The swing creaked as someone sat beside him. It was Mr. Ramsey, the retired firefighter who sometimes volunteered at the school. Thick hands, quiet eyes, he didn't say anything for a long time. Just rocked slowly in his swing, then, "You know," Mr. Ramsey said, voice low, "we had a dog on the force once. Shepherd, like yours, Name was Atlas. Eliot didn't respond. Mr. Ramsey went on. Atlas wasn't the biggest or the fastest. He was the one who stayed calm when things got bad. When the smoke was thick and the alarms were screaming dot, dot. Atlas never ran. The old man turned his head, studying Eliot carefully. Courage doesn't mean you're not scared, kid. It means you do the right thing anyway. He leaned closer. Nova doesn't need to be perfect. She just needs someone to believe she's worth the fight. Mr. Ramsey stood, squeezed Eliot's shoulder. You've already done the hard part. You stayed. Eliot watched him walk away, the late afternoon sun turning his figure into a long shadow against the asphalt. He reached into his pocket, crumpling the letter tighter. Nova didn't need to be flawless. She needed to be seen, just like him. And Eliot wasn't about to stop fighting now. The evaluation day arrived. Gray clouds hunched over the town, heavy with unched rain. At the community center, Eliot clutched Nova's leash tighter than he ever had before. Nova stood by his side, calm but alert, her tail low and steady. The evaluators watched from behind a folding table. Clipboards, pens, judging eyes. The first test, obedience. Eliot gave the hand signals they had practiced. Nova hesitated once, glancing at the ceiling when a loudspeaker crackled. But then she moved, perfect, deliberate steps, and sat by Eliot's side, her body lined with trust. The second test, reaction to noise. A metal tray clattered to the floor. Nova flinched, tears pinning back, but she didn't bolt. She leaned into Eliot's side, grounding herself. He dropped to one knee, pressed his forehead gently to hers. I'm here, he whispered. Nova let out a slow, shaky breath and stayed. The evaluators murmured, scribbled notes. Final test, socialization. A volunteer approached, reaching out to pet Nova. She stood still, accepted the touch. Didn't pull away, didn't bare her teeth, just stood, solid, present. The lead evaluator cleared her throat. Nova shows signs of trauma response, but demonstrates strong emotional regulation under handler guidance. She looked at Eliot, really looked. This dog trusts you. Eliot's chest tightened painfully. Is that enough? The evaluator smiled softly. It's everything, a stamp. A signature, approval. Nova was his, officially, permanently. The leash he held wasn't temporary anymore. It was a lifeline. The evaluator knelt down, eye level with Eliot. You didn't just save her, you know. She saved you too. Eliot looked at Nova, at the dog who stayed through the storms, through the silence, through the darkest nights. He nodded, because he already knew. The ride home felt lighter. Eliot rolled down the window halfway, letting the spring air rush into the car. Nova sat in the back seat, her nose lifted slightly into the breeze, her eyes half closed with peace. At home, Eliot's grandmother had prepared a surprise. A brand new dog bed, a shiny blue collar with a silver tag that read, Nova, family. Eliot knelt beside her, carefully removed the temporary shelter collar, the one that said property of rescue services. Slid the new one over her head. Nova shook once, as if shedding the weight of every place she had ever been forgotten. Eliot pressed his forehead gently to hers. You're home, he whispered. That night, they sat together on the porch, no words, no noise. Just the creak of the swing and the steady thump of Nova's tail against the wooden planks. Eliot pulled the melted keychain from his pocket, the only thing he had saved from the fire. He held it up, studying it in the soft glow of the porch light. Then, without hesitation, he unclipped it from his belt loop, fastened it to Nova's collar, a piece of the past. Anchored to the heart of his future, Nova looked up at him, tongue lolling slightly. Home wasn't a building, home was this. The warmth pressed against his side. The steady heartbeat, the shared promise. No more running, no more losing, we stay. Eliot wasn't invisible anymore. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't push to the front of the line. But when he spoke, people listened. He volunteered to read aloud in class. Not because he loved the attention, but because he wanted his voice back. And every time he stumbled or his voice cracked, Nova would glance up from where she lay by his desk, calm, steady, proud. He joined the art club, entered a painting in the spring festival. A canvas covered in golds and blacks, a boy and his dog, standing together under a sky split by light and storm. It won first prize for most heart. When they called his name at the award ceremony, Eliot stepped forward. His hands didn't shake, his heart didn't race. He stood tall, Nova at his side. The mayor leaned down, handing him the ribbon. "You've got courage, young man." Eliot smiled. "I had a good teacher." He scratched Nova behind the ear, because courage wasn't about shouting, it was about staying. About loving something enough to fight for it. About walking into the fire and walking back out changed. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was living. Not all heroes roar, some walk beside us. Quiet, steady, unshaken, when the world crumbles at our feet. Some battles aren't fought with swords or shields. They're fought with leashes held tight in trembling hands. With quiet promises whispered under breath. With the simple, stubborn act of staying. Eliot and Nova didn't save each other with grand gestures. They saved each other by refusing to let go. By refusing to believe that broken meant worthless. By building something stronger from the ashes of everything they had lost. Because healing doesn't always mean forgetting. Sometimes it means remembering. Who stayed? Who saw? Who chose love anyway? If this story found a quiet corner of your heart, if you believe that courage can look like silence and love can look like staying, then let it grow. Like this video if you know that some of the strongest bonds are built in the softest moments. Share it with someone who might be walking through their own ashes, looking for a hand or a paw to hold. Subscribe for more true stories of resilience, hope, and the quiet heroes who refuse to let go. And in the comments, tell us about your Nova. That friend, that soul, that survivor who taught you that home isn't a place you find. It's a place you build, together. Because somewhere out there, a boy is still sitting on his porch steps, watching the sunset bleed into the trees, waiting for someone to stay. Let the story be the reminder. Sometimes, survival looks like a boy and a dog under a heavy sky. And sometimes, it looks like choosing to stay.